Brian Murphy with WRAL, joined once again by Bryn Renner, former North Carolina quarterback, former NFL quarterback. And we're talking UNC, even though they had a bye week last week, maybe the best thing that could happen for North Carolina and Bill Belichick, get a bye week, kind of regroup. Bryn, during a bye week, what can you really learn? You're a guy who's been there. 2-2 start, kind of sluggish. ACC schedule coming up. You get a bye week. What goes on during that bye week?
Yeah, Brian, it's a chance to reset, and obviously Carolina needs it right now. It's a week where you can do a lot of self-scouting the first 4 weeks. You can kind of reassess, hey, what running plays have worked, what haven't worked. Passing game, you can kind of go through concepts that you guys have developed and thought going into the season were going to work, but obviously have not been working. And then you can you get practice reps to get a little bit more confidence. Yes, you're going against your own team and you've been doing that all training camp, but you kind of get a breath of fresh air to say, hey, look, where are we now? And then for the player standpoint, can we get in the locker room and say we have a chance to still play an ACC schedule coming up and we can get on a run. So it's trying to bring all the positive things that kind of went wrong for the first 4 weeks in the first quarter of the season, then get to the second quarter of the season and say, hey, look, the next 4 games is where we are, which is great because we have another bye week after Clemson. So if you don't really focus on Clemson and make it more of a bigger game than it is and focus on the long term and playing one game at a time, I think it'll be a lot better for them. So hopefully that's what they focus on this week.
Yeah, I've been around college football for a long time. I've covered it. I've never seen anyone quite do it like Belichick is. Most teams set their depth chart for that opener, and there might be some changes as things develop. The way Bill Belichick has talked, these first 4 weeks, in many ways, we're sort of seeing what the roster, what players should play. If you look at who played in week 1 versus who played in week 4, kind of some dramatic changes there.
Mhm.
Is this? It seems a little unusual to me, but given they didn't have much time to put this team together, is that a smart way of kind of evaluating those first 4 weeks?
Yeah, I think you're kind of seeing the NFL mold of, hey, let's play these 4 weeks as a preseason game and see how it shapes out. Because if you think about week 1, you're not really favored to beat TCU. You're favored to beat Charlotte and Richmond, which is great. And then UCF was kind of like a push game and see where you were, and then get to the bye week. So I think you kind of have a good general knowledge now, or he should, of the talent level and who can make plays. But definitely an interesting approach. Brian, you've been around the game for 30 years, and it's just an interesting way to do it. Like even think about playing a freshman running back. Like we didn't think Demond Lane was going to play this year, and so it's kind of one of those things where that's kind of the fluctuation of college football now of the transfer portal. And you have to really figure out who your guys are and who can play. And Brian, I've always said this. There's a reason why people are in the transfer portal for one of two reasons. Either they got kicked out of school and couldn't go to school there anymore and were still a really good player, or they had some success and their team wasn't doing well, and you kind of got to figure out how they're going to fit into another team, because when you just go from a straight another team, you might have a different scheme that you have to learn. So you're kind of really, it's really maybe not the scheme that fits that person, but you're trying to mold them into that. So that might be something that he's trying to figure out is, okay, is this guy a pro style player? Or is he, we have to more, with Gio, do more zone read and just kind of develop how that person is going to play so you can be successful.
I want to get to Gio in 1 second. Look, I'm not suggesting this team's going to go on a run and win the ACC and play for the title, but in the way that college football is now, these first 4 games don't really matter. I mean, if
Right.
you win the ACC, and if you're any of these teams, if you win the ACC, you're going to the college football playoff.
hmm
And so, in some ways, it's a different way of thinking, I think, for some college football fans.
I completely agree. And I think that's the biggest thing is if you focus on your conference games and winning those, and then we used to focus on just winning the games that were in state. And we used to have a big sign and win the games that were in state because we usually played Wake Forest, NC State, ECU, Duke, and 3/4 of those teams were going to be in our conference. So if you can just focus on winning the ACC and winning each ACC game, I think that is such a better approach, especially where they are now at 2-2.
That first ACC game coming up this week, Clemson. Clemson's been disappointing as well. I think the big news out of Carolina, and we'll get more updates on this as the week goes, but Gio Lopez left the game against UCF with what appeared to be a leg injury. Max Johnson came in and looked good once again. He's looked good in 2 relief appearances throughout the bye week. Sounds like Max Johnson has been getting the snaps with the ones as Gio works through whatever injury that he has. Could you see them starting Max Johnson? And if they do start Max Johnson, what does it do to the offense?
Yeah, I could. I could see, them playing Max this week and trying to get Gio back for the next 2 weeks because you got a bye week after. So if he is banged up enough not to go, I would play Max just because it's a healthy option, and then have Gio sit out this week and then next week, and really you have pretty much 20 some days until you play again. So it's a long game approach, especially for this game because Max has a little bit more experience going against bigger time teams. And so I would play Max and I would run him out there and I would say, hey, look, find completions. And that's what he's done. He's really moved the ball. He had a great 17 play drive. And yeah, it's matriculating the ball down the field and throwing it more vertically, which we talked about in the past, Brian. They have to get the ball pushed down the field vertically. So, in my opinion, I would have given all the reps to Max and said, hey, look, we're just going to, Gio, stay on the shelf for a little bit and come back when you're ready. And let's see if Max can kind of put some points on the board for us. But I think going on this week, and if my coaching experience, you've always tried to get a lot of guys reps in the bye week because you're going to have to use them down the stretch because injuries are going to happen, and we're already seeing that 4 weeks in. And you take a look at Oklahoma and across the grand scheme of guys have lost their quarterback. Syracuse, that we were talking about before we got on, Brian. People are losing quarterbacks, so you got to have two. I've always said you better have two than just have one that you depend on the entire season. So it happens across the entire country in football. And now you get a chance to, hopefully see Max a little bit and then get Gio healthy.
If Max plays well, and he's played well, obviously, in two relief appearances when those games were pretty well decided. If he plays well, do you have to stick with him as a guy who's been in that locker room when one guy's moving you down the field and the other guy is Gio's turned the ball over? His completion percentage is fine, but they're
Hmm.
not scoring points necessarily, and he's turned the ball over a lot. Um, if Max plays well against Clemson and they've got a lot of talent despite their record, do you have to stick with him?
I think you got to, Brian. I really do. I think just for the locker room's sake and honestly for giving your team the best chance to win. You got to put a guy behind center that does that. And, whoever that is. And I think that's always been the case as far as, making good decisions from a leadership standpoint at the head coaching position. You have to, like, I mean, he did it with Bledsoe and Brady. He played Brady because he thought he gave him the best chance to win. And he's done it with, they had Garoppolo and Jacoby Brissett, and he always played the guy that, Garoppolo was healthy, came back healthy, and they still played Brissett on a Thursday night, I recall. So you got to play the guy that gives you the best chance to win and score points because, if you can't score and move the ball, and we've seen that they've struggled and are on the lower half of even the bottom of the country of moving the football and scoring points, you have to be able to put the guy behind center that does that for you. And if it's Max, it's Max, and you get Gio ready for if his opportunity comes again. And you got to develop the whole quarterback room because guys are in different stages. Like I sat the bench behind TJ for 2 years, but I had Sundays was a true scrimmage day, and I played a 60 play game against the guys that didn't play. So I got 2 years worth of reps running the same plays that we did, the same script the day before, which was great. And I think it was part of my growth process. And you see, even like the Packers did it with Jordan Love, they sat him for 2 years behind Rodgers, and then you play that quarterback when they're ready. I think if you can kind of take this approach that Gio's coming from South Alabama, maybe Max has more reps. He's a senior. He's seen a lot more of SEC football. Then you can still get Gio reps during the season. Not saying that he won't be ready to play, but it takes the pressure off for him to have to go perform.
I mean, you could even say something. I'm not suggesting that they're doing this, but you could create a package for Gio, take advantage of
Exactly.
some of the skills that he has that
Yep.
Max doesn't necessarily bring to the table. Um, we've talked a lot about UNC, and obviously they have this weird stretch where they have a bye, Clemson, another bye, Friday game against Cal. After that, take me inside the locker room. You're 2-2. Some guys have left the program. Obviously, the
Hmm.
4 game transfer rule comes into effect right now. What do you think's happening inside that locker room? And if you were a player, what are you talking about as you move into this stretch?
We used to say we're all we have and we're all we need. That's it. It's just going to be the guys in this locker room, and there's been a lot of pressure preseason, right? And you kind of weathered that storm and had to go through that adversity because as a kid and as a fan nowadays, you can't really escape from social media. Everyone says they do, but it's between your mom's calling you, your dad calling you, your grandparents, you're seeing it on Twitter, your girlfriend's telling you, it's like this unwritten rule that everyone's just talking about you. And as a player, you can really bond around that. I remember we didn't start off very hot when Larry was here in 2012, and I think Gio was out, and I think we were 1-2 at some point, and we lost two close games to like Wake Forest, coming down towards the end, and and we reeled off like 6 straight wins and ended up going 8-4 and not being able. We won the ACC Coastal, but not being able to go to the bowl game because of the bowl ban. And I'll never forget we had a players only meeting when we were kind of in that rut in the middle of the season, and it gets long, and the practices are getting long, and it's getting darker earlier, and you're like very, you're irritated because you're losing. And we had a players only meeting, and it was more of like, okay, we're going to be in all in this together, and we can either really stink and have everyone be right, or we could just worry about ourselves, focus on the next practice, and go play. And the biggest bond, Brian, is the 125 guys in the locker room. That's it. And I've always said this, it really doesn't matter who your coach is, because if your players lead the team, then there's no better feeling because he can just go coach and talk about scheme. And that's what I've always tried to do as a leader, but it also, you can be that guy in the locker room that says that and says, hey, look, coach going to put together the scheme, but we have to go out and execute. And I think that's the one thing right now is critical in the season for Carolina is someone's got to step up and do that.
Broadening the conversation a little bit, it sounds like that's what happened at Duke, right? They lost two
Yeah.
games. Manny Diaz says they talked about this. We've got enough talent in this room. We just got to go and play Duke football. Conversely, you're seeing at NC State lost two tough games. Obviously, the loss to Duke, and then to lose to Virginia Tech, another team that may have bonded over their coach being fired.
Mm-hmm.
In a difficult week, obviously with defensive coordinator DJ Elliott
Yeah.
losing his daughter. I can't imagine what they were going through in that locker room.
Yeah.
But it seems like all three teams, if you want to count the local teams, sort of have this inflection point. Duke seems to have maybe gotten over it. They blew out Syracuse this week. NC State kind of going through it right now, and obviously Carolina, we've talked a lot about. When you look at the ACC or any of those teams, what stands out to you?
Yeah, I think it's kind of this point in the season where someone's going to really run away with it. And like we were talking about, it could be Miami, it could be Florida State, but for the teams in the triangle, they're all kind of around the same point in their season, right? NC State looked good early, right? It has a good win against Virginia. Virginia beats Florida State. You're kind of seeing that there's a lot of flatlining going on. Hey, we're all kind of the same. And week in and week out in the ACC, we see this all the time. It comes down to who's going to make the most plays pretty much in the fourth quarter. And there has to be one of those gut check moments. And for Duke, I think it was probably the Tulane game because you see how they've responded since then. And then you look at NC State, it's really kind of going to be how they respond from losing it. And they were favored by a lot against Virginia Tech. And it's going to be, same thing for Carolina. It's going to be these three teams on who can say, okay, let's put our best foot forward. Who's making plays for us? And how do we stay motivated for the rest of the year? Because you still have really, you're in control of your own destiny still, because you still haven't played that many ACC games. But it's kind of, we're all always, Brian, it seems like the ACC is flatlining again, and we're all even, especially with Florida State losing to UVA.
Yeah, it's so strange. I mean, obviously the ACC has a couple teams up there, but you look at the Big 12 as sort of like throw 16 teams into a hat and see who comes out each year.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the SEC and the Big 10 are a little bit different, but both the ACC and the Big 12 seem to be at this level where you just kind of throw everybody in a hat, and one year you get SMU, one year you get Arizona State. You're just not really sure. I mean, this year it does look like Miami, but they can lose to Florida State this week. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I know. And that's the crazy thing is the ACC is always going to be, we have a top 10 team and they fall off and they come back, but they're even more pissed off than before, right? So like Florida State's going to come and give Miami their best shot. So you really you never know. And that's the biggest thing is when you have really good team in the ACC, there's always good talented teams that are there's so much parity, you just never know.
Last one, I saw somebody say, Miami actually is worse off. They'd rather have played Florida State. They would have rather Florida State found a way to win that Virginia game than having to go now to Tallahassee and play a Florida State team coming off a loss. As someone who's been there, is that, do you look at it like, oh man, I kind of wish they had won because they're going to be really riled up now?
It's always in the back of your mind because you're like, oh man, because if you catch somebody when they're too confident, that's the best thing. But you catch somebody when they've had a terrible week of practice, they were the number 18 in the country, they lost on the road in overtime. They are going back to work, and the coaches are more pissed off, and even it's a tough week to be a Seminole. And then they get to Saturday and they're like caged animals, and they're coming out and giving you your best shot. So I always like teams that were kind of like more confident and play the underdog role. But now when it's like, oh man, we're going to get their best shot because they can really revitalize their season and get back in the potentially the playoff picture if they beat them. And so it's kind of a playoff atmosphere for both teams right now because your back's against the wall. And I think learning from experiences, like I never forget, I did this against, Clemson when they were really, really good and we had a chance and you put too much pressure on the game. So I think if you approach each game, which is really hard, and you treat it as an individual game and not like look to the future, it's a lot easier. But that took me 2 years to learn, Brian, until it was almost too late for me to be like, okay, well, this is just another game. So I think it comes down to the leadership factor of that. But yeah, it's going to be a really good game. It's going to be a really good end of the ACC season.
Well, Bryn, thank you so much for joining us this week to talk Carolina football, ACC football, and all the happenings. And you will be at the Clemson game on
I will.
Saturday,
I
right?
will. Yep. Back in action.
Big chance for UNC, obviously, to write their season. Big concert on campus before
Yeah.
that one. Ludacris performing.
10 a.m. Ludacris,
Wilson
Brian. 10 a.m., not 10 p.m.
I wonder if he put that in his contract. 10 a. I can't perform before a certain hour.
I'll be just waking up with my coffee, watching game day, listening to Ludacris.
Should be a fun one on the Chapel Hill campus this week. Bryn Renner, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week here with Brian Murphy at WRAL.
Thanks, Brian.